bit of a controversial one. I've seen a lot of guys talk about this one, but I haven't seen a lot of girls, so let me give my take on this. Gen Z men think women should obey them, study says, by Asia Grace, published on March 5, 2026. They are youngsters with old outlooks. The article reports on a study examining attitudes towards gender roles amongst young adults in Generation Z, my generation. The research found that 31% of Gen Z believe that wives should always obey their husbands. The same study reported that 33% of Gen Z men believe a husband should have the final say in important household decisions. These results surprise researchers because younger generations are often assumed to hold more progressive views on gender equality. The study surveyed more than 1,000 young adults between the ages of 18 and 34 about the beliefs regarding relationships and gender roles. The findings suggested that a significant minority of young men still support traditional or hierarchical views of marriage. A patriarchal family structure is a family model in which the father or husband holds primary authority within the household. Historically, this structure has been common in many societies, when men control financial decisions and family leadership. The survey measures whether young people still support elements of this structure. Some respondents also expressed the belief that a real woman should prioritize supporting her husband. The article notes that these views contrast with the broader cultural narrative that younger generations strongly support gender equality. Researchers and commentators cited in the article described the results as surprising and concerning. The survey also examined differences in attitudes between men and women in the same generation. Women in the study were generally less likely than men to support traditional obedience-based roles in marriage. The findings reflect ongoing debates about masculinity, gender expectations, and changing relationship norms among younger adults. The article also connects the results to broader discussions about how social media and online communities influence young men's views. Some analysts argue that online influencers and internet subcultures promoting traditional gender roles may shape these attitudes. The report notes the discussion about masculinity and dating have become prominent across social media platforms. Critics say that some of these online communities promote outdated or unequal ideas about relationships. Others argue that some young men feel uncertain about their role in modern relationships and respond by embracing traditional expectations. The article also highlights how generational attitudes toward marriage and gender roles are shifting in complex ways. While some Gen Z individuals embrace highly progressive views, others appear to be moving toward more traditional perspectives. Researchers say the findings show that younger generations are not politically or culturally uniform. Instead, the generation displays a wide range of beliefs about relationships, authority, and gender roles. The article concludes that debates over gender equality and traditional marriage expectations continue to evolve among young adults. These discussions are influenced by cultural changes, economic pressures, and the impact of digital media. As Gen Z ages into long-term relationships and marriage, their attitudes may continue to influence broader social trends. Researchers say further studies will be needed to understand how these views develop and whether they change over time. Alright, let's get into this. The mainstream media wants you to believe that wanting a normal, functioning family is an extremist position. They throw around words like misogynistic, toxic masculinity, and antiquated because they know that if they repeat it enough, some people will start to believe it. But I'm here to tell you as a housewife that what they're describing isn't a crisis, it's a return to sanity. Let's look at the headline. Gen Z men think women should obey them, study says. The use of quotes around the word obey is their first trick. It's meant to make you think it's some kind of weird controlling domination. That's not what it's about. In a real marriage, a wife respecting her husband's leadership isn't about being a slave or a child. It's about recognizing that for a family to work, someone has to have the final say. It's about order. They're trying to paint a picture of some guy cracking a whip, when the reality is flying you like a captain steering a ship. The captain listens to his crew, he values their input, but when the storm hits, he's the one who has to make the call. The crew doesn't vote on which way to turn. They throw out this statistic of 31% of Gen Z men agreeing that a wife should always obey their husband. They call this staggering and startling. But why? Because it goes against their narrative that everyone is on board with the idea that men and women are identical. Why not? The truth is that men and women are different. We have different strengths, different weaknesses, and different roles. A lot of young guys are seeing the results of over 50 years of feminism, and they see the dysfunction. They've seen parents get divorced, they've seen their friends and their mothers struggle to become everything to everyone and burn out. They're looking at what's happening and thinking to themselves that maybe there's a better way. The article mentions that this study was done by the Global Institute for Women's Leadership in London. Let me ask you something. Do you think an institute with that name is ever going to put out a study that says, hey, you know what? Traditional families are actually pretty great, and women are happier in them? Of course not. They're biased. Their entire existence depends on pushing the idea that women are perpetual victims who need to be liberated from their evil husbands. They have a vested interest in fighting problems where none exist. They don't get paid otherwise. They talk about how this is all happening just ahead of International Women's Day. This is not a coincidence. They're timing this to create maximum outrage, to get people riled up about patriarchy right before the annual feminist festival. It's a calculated move. Then, they really show their hand. They call Gen Z men quads and whippersnappers. Could you imagine the outrage of a conservative article called Young Women Bimbos or Airheads? The double standard is obvious. This isn't journalism. It's a smear campaign. They're mocking these young men for having the audacity to disagree with feminism. They're essentially saying how dare these young people have independent thoughts. They should be listening to us. The article brings up the red pill subculture and names Andrew Tate and Scott Galloway. Now here's a secret. The media uses Tate because he is their boogeyman. Although sometimes, I think he's a plant. Notice, however, that they cannot talk about any other male in these groups. It's because they'll lose. They can't win in the marketplace of free ideas, so they result in discrediting and smear campaigns. It's sad, really. But for the sake of argument and honesty, I'll take their claims seriously and act like they're pillars of these men's group when in reality they're subsections. So let's be honest about why they're popular. They're popular because they're saying things a lot of young men know aren't true but aren't allowed to say in public. They're pushing back against the constant message that masculinity is toxic, that these men are inherently oppressive, and that women are perfect angels who can do no wrong. Trust me, we can do a lot wrong. You're not perfect angels. These guys give voice to the frustration that a lot of young men feel. They're tired of being told they're the problem, and media calls them meatheads. Eat and say they're force-feeding toxic masculinity. But all they're really doing is offering an alternative to the feminist ideal that's being pushed everywhere else. And the line about these young fellows eating it up, that's just condescending. It implies that these guys are too stupid to think for themselves. They're not. Maybe they're agreeing with ideas because they resonate with their own experiences and observations. The article then brings up the statistic that 21% of Gen Z men think a real woman should never initiate sex. They're framed as some kind of crazy extremist view. But then again, they're missing the point. It's not about a woman never being able to show she's interested. It's about the dynamic of the chase. It's about the man being the pursuer. It's about creating a certain kind of tension and excitement that gets lost when the woman is always the one making the first move. It's a different way of looking at things. In simplest terms, it's one that values assertiveness and female receptivity. The feminist view is that everything has to be 50-50 all the time, in every situation. But life isn't a business meeting. Attraction is not a spreadsheet. It's crazy how deep this is in society. Watch any Sean Connery movie and then compare it with Jack Reacher, and you'll see why modern tough guy movies don't do anything for me anymore. I can't really elaborate on why, but there's something off about it. Then they highlight the fact that only 12% of Gen Z women agreed with this view. See what they're doing? They're trying to create conflict to make it seem like men and women are at odds with each other. See? Even the women don't agree with these crazy men, is what they'll say. But what they don't tell you is that the women who do agree with these traditional views are often the ones who are in happy, stable relationships. They're also not likely to answer this survey either. They're usually busy with more important things. The women who are screaming the loudest about feminism are often the ones who are the most miserable with their lives. They're the ones who are hitting 35 and realizing that they don't even like their career, and now they can't find anyone. If it isn't obvious, I've been reading Rachel Wilson's book. The article mentions that 41% of Gen Z men find successful women attractive. They call this an alarming duality. Why is it alarming? Because it doesn't fit their neat little box of what a traditional man is supposed to think. In their world, a traditional man wants a woman who's barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen. He's intimidated by successful women. Here's a secret. He's not intimidated. He just doesn't want to deal with it. And why is there so much hatred for the kitchen? It's where food is prepared. Furthermore, likely that 41% of men are different from the 31% originally mentioned. People are different after all. It's a bit more complicated than that. They don't want a doormat, but they also don't want a woman who's constantly nagging them. They already compete with others outside the home. They shouldn't have to compete with their wife as well. A woman can be successful and ambitious without being masculine and aggressive, especially since rearing the next generation is more important than sending emails on a daycare job. She can build a life together with him. Isn't that more rewarding? The article then moves on to the idea that men should be physically tough. They frame this as some kind of harmful hyper-masculinity. But what's wrong with a man wanting to be strong? Since why is physical strength a bad thing? For most of human history, a man's ability to protect his family was directly tied to his physical strength. That's still true today, even if it's less obvious. A man who is physically capable is a man who can protect himself, his wife, and his kids if he needs to. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's a good thing. He wants to feel safe with our man. He wants to know that he can handle whatever life throws at him. The statistic about 21% of Gen Z men thinking that men who take part in caregiving are less masculine is interesting. They present this as some kind of backward view. But then again, they're missing the nuance. Most men, even traditional men, are happy to help out with their kids. They love their children and want to be involved in their lives. But there is a difference between being an involved father and being a primary caregiver. There's a difference between helping out with the kids and being a house husband who's home with them all day while the wife is at work. For a lot of men and for a lot of women, that doesn't sound right. In fact, it goes against our natural instincts. Men are naturally wired to want to be providers and protectors. Women are naturally wired to be. It's not a bad thing, it just means that we're different. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's what makes men and women complement each other. The article ends with some quotes from the experts who did the study. One of them, Hee-Jung Chang, talks about a striking gap between people's personal views and what they imagine society demands of them. She says this gap is particularly pronounced among Gen Z men. This is the most revealing part of the entire article. She's admitting that a lot of people, especially young men, don't actually believe what's being pushed on them. They're just going along with it because they feel they have to. They're afraid of losing their jobs and social standing. But what the study really shows is that the message is starting to break. More and more young men are getting tired of the lies. They're tired of having to pretend to believe things they don't believe. They're tired of having to walk on eggshells, constantly worried that something they say or do will be interpreted as a Title IX violation, and realize they've been lied to. Professor Chung talks about how troubling it is that these young men are feeling, and I quote, pressure to conform to rigid masculine ideals. But what about the pressure to conform to rigid feminist ideals? What about the pressure to pretend that men and women are the same? What about the pressure to suppress your natural instincts? What about the pressure to constantly apologize for being a man? Nobody ever talks about that pressure, but it's real, and it's crushing a generation. The article is framed as a crisis, a step backwards for society. But what if it's not a crisis? What if it's a correction? What if it's a sign that we're starting to move away from the excesses of feminism and back towards a more balanced, more realistic view of men and women? What if it's a sign that young people reject the idea that happiness comes from a career and rediscover the idea that true happiness comes from a loving, stable family? The problem with feminist worldview is that it's based on the fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. It assumes that men and women are blank slates and that our differences are purely social. But that's not true. Men and women are biologically, psychologically, and emotionally different. You have different hormones, different brain structures, different evolutionary histories. These differences are real, and they matter. They're what makes men and women so good at working together, at complementing each other, and creating something beautiful and lasting together. The feminist project has been trying to erase these differences, to create a unisex society where men and women are interchangeable. But it's not working. It's creating more confusion, more anxiety, and more unhappiness than ever before. Many men don't know how to be men anymore, and many women don't know how to be women anymore. What this study is really showing is that they realize that there is wisdom in the old ways, in the traditions that have been passed down for generations. They're starting to see that there's a reason why for thousands of years societies have been organized around the family, when a man is the head of household and a woman is the homemaker. It's not because men are evil, and it's not because women were oppressed. It's because it works. It's because it's the way we're designed to function. Let's get back to the core idea here. A wife obeying her husband. The media wants you to picture some guy on the couch yelling at his wife to get him a beer. That's not what it's about. In a traditional marriage, the husband's leadership is an act of service. He's not lording it over his wife. He's leading her, protecting her, providing for her. He's making the big decisions so that she doesn't have to. He's taking on the responsibility for the family's well-being. And in return for that service, she respects him. She supports him. She follows his lead, and so on. And so what if he wants her to get him a beer? Sometimes I just make tea and bring him some. No questions asked. I appreciate him. So when he's at home, I want him happy, and he wants me to be happy. It's teamwork, but with different rules. One person leads, the other follows. If both people try to lead, they fight. And if both people try to follow, they just trip on each other. But when the rules are clear, when the man leads and the woman follows, you can create something functional together. The article talks about how adults over 30 largely disagree with these notions. That's not surprising. My mom's generation were the ones who were fed all this from birth. They were the ones who were told they could have it all. A high-powered career, a perfect family, a fabulous social life, and that they didn't need a man for any of it. They were the ones who were told that getting married and having kids was a trap. That it would hold them back from their true potential, whatever that means. And a lot of them bought it. She spent her 20s chasing money only to wake up one day and realize that she was lonely. Luckily for my mom, my dad got with her. Still, growing up and seeing her miserable all the time made me never want to do what she did. We're seeing this. We're looking at our older sisters, our aunts, her neighbors, and we see the suffering. We see the women who followed the feminist script to the letter, who did everything they were supposed to do, and are still miserable. We're starting to think that maybe that's not the life that we want, that I know it's not the life I want. Questioning this is a good thing. The article also mentioned that 40% of Gen Z men feel that young men should try to be physically tough even if they're not naturally big. The media frames this as a bad thing as hypermasculinity. But what's so bad about wanting to be tough? Life is tough, especially for men. The world is a dangerous place. A man needs to be tough. Not just for his own sake, but for the sake of his family. He needs to be able to handle the physical and emotional challenges that life throws at him. He needs to be able to protect his wife and kids, not just from physical threats, but from the world in general. The ideal of the feminist is of the sensitive, emotionally vulnerable man who's in touch with his feelings and cries at the drop of a hat. is not what we're attracted to. In fact, here's a secret. When women say that they want a sensitive, emotional, or vulnerable man, what they're really saying is that they want a man who will listen to them, be sensitive, emotional, and vulnerable. Personally, I like it when my husband takes charge. I like it when he's decisive. I like it when he pins me down. I like it when he's passionate about something. It shows he's confident. It's sexy. Some women say they want the modern man, but their actions say otherwise. Look at our written works. Our serious books like Handmaid's Tale are about government-mandated procreation, and our romance books involve us being taken by monsters or having affairs with billionaires or demons. Men didn't write those books. They didn't sexualize women. Women did that. But truth is, most of us want to be coveted and desired. It's just that the media has demonized men to the point where many women suffer from cognitive dissonance. We're attracted to a man who has a sense of purpose, who knows who they are, and where they're going. We're attracted to a man who can lead. We don't want a girlfriend, we want a man. The problem is that for the past 50 years, schools and the media have been teaching boys to be anything but that. They've been teaching them to suppress their natural instincts and be more like girls. They've been drugging them with Ritalin because they can't sit still in a classroom. This is life for girls. They've been telling them that their natural desire for competition and adventure is toxic. And then we wonder why so many of them are lost and angry. What this study is showing is that a lot of young men are starting to reject the programming. They understand that there is nothing wrong with being a man, and they're looking for a woman who appreciates that. Someone who wants to be with a man, not compete with him. The article ends on a note of concern, with the experts hoping that their findings will trigger broader conversations about gender roles and equality. But the conversation has been dominated by one side for far too long. It's time for the other side to be heard. It's time for people to start talking about the fact that the feminist experiment has failed. Divorce is at an all-time high. And while it has gone down, it's because marriage is going down. Women are taking more SSRIs than before. And worst of all, abortion and ultra-processed instant meals have killed 32% of Gen Z already. It's time for people to start talking about the fact that men and women are different, and that's okay. It's time for people to start talking about the fact that traditional families are functional. This study isn't a crisis, it's a wake-up call. It's a sign that the new generation is starting to question the ideologies of the past. It's a sign that they're looking for something lasting. And that's something we should all be celebrating, not fearing.